Hello everyone. Online tracking has become de facto practice of the web. Trackers are able to follow users across the internet by assigning user-specific identifiers to them. One of the phenomena stemmed from this practice is ID sharing. User ID sharing happens when multiple domains share a specific identifier that they have assigned to a particular user. Consider a frequent visitor of CNN.com. When CNN is loaded, it will send a request to an ad exchange asking for a targeted advertisement for this particular user, for example, Rubicon project. Consequently, Rubicon project redirects this request to an ad buyer, and it includes the specific identifier that it has already assigned to this user in its request. The ad buyer in this scenario is switchad.com. So switchad.com will match the Rubicon project identifier with its own internal identifier and retrieves the user profile. And then based on the user profile, it retrieves a targeted advertisement for that particular user. So this is a simple yet common scenario of user ID sharing. Parties involved in user ID sharing are able to aggregate data that has been collected from different sources to construct a comprehensive profile of the users. Not to mention that in most of the cases, users are not aware of such practice. They don't have any control over it. They don't know who has access to this data and how it's going to be used. So in this study, our purpose is to analyze the extent of this practice on the web and also to study the nature of parties involved in ID sharing. For this purpose, we extended Lightbeam, which is a Firefox browser extension. It visualizes the presence of third-party trackers for the end user. We modified this extension to log all HTTP requests and responses. We recruited 129 participants from 22 countries distributed in all around the world. We asked our users to use Firefox as their default browser for a minimum duration of 2 weeks. Our participants visited about 5,000 websites, including more than 6,000 third-party trackers. So after collecting the data, first step was to identify user-specific IDs. For this purpose, we applied a set of rules on our data per each user. First of all, we identified all key value pairs in cookies and also in URL parameters. We excluded any inconsistent key value pairs, meaning that if there is a key belonging to a certain domain with multiple values, those instances were excluded. And obviously, we excluded all values that they have been shared between multiple users. So applying this method, we identified over 3,000 user-specific identifier from 800 domains. And interestingly, the majority of these domains were sharing this identifier with at least one more domain. Knowing the user-specific identifiers, we defined ID sharing groups, meaning that any set of domains that they are sharing this identifier with other domains. So we identified about more than 600 ID sharing groups containing 2 members and to over 8 members. So here we are looking at the top 10 user ID sharing groups based on the frequency of their occurrences. Sharing between Google and Google Ads services, Google and YouTube are amongst the top 10. You might notice that some of this ID sharing is happening within same organizations. For example, Sina and Weibo, they are both different properties of Sina organization. Sharing between Yahoo and Yahoo MG, they all belongs to Yahoo. However, there are some sharing across different organizations, for example, Rubicon project and TapAd. Therefore, we broaden our approach from domains to organizations to see that whether this ID sharing is limited to only certain certain organizations, or it is spread across different organizations. For this purpose, we identified parent organizations of domain using their email addresses. We used NS lookup utility tool to fetch their email addresses, and there are some cases that the email address is only a general account for example, a CDN. For those cases, we looked at the host record of domains, and in cases that we couldn't find any information, we just assumed that that domain doesn't have any parent organization. This figure shows the number of organizational ID sharing groups across the size of the groups. In fact, we see that only 8% of this ID sharing is happening within single organizations, of which Google is very dominant in this category. But the majority of ID sharing is happening between various organizations, and in particular, two organizational sharing happens very dominantly. Analyzing these two organizational sharing groups shows that about 70% of these groups, the majority of them, they include members that it only happens, they only appear in one ID sharing group. However, some companies like Google, Rubicon Project, and Optimizely, that is a targeted ad company, they appeared in over 30 organizational ID sharing groups with 2 members. Afterwards, we looked at the type of the services that are provided by parties involved in ID sharing. For this purpose, we used the Trend Micro Online Service to categorize our domains. We identified over 70 different categories of domains. Perhaps expectedly, we observed dominant presence of advertisement-related parties as sharing specific user ID to serve a targeted advertisement. As I explained earlier, it is a common practice. Sharing across search engine and web advertisement, sharing within different ad trackers, sharing in search engines. They appeared as the top 3 categories of ID sharing in our data set. However, in general, similar to the organizational sharing, we observe that ID sharing is happening across various type of categories. We identified only 28 ID sharing groups that the sharing was happening within same category. Unfortunately, we even observed the sensitive category of information that they are participating in ID sharing with advertisement services or with search engines. So here you're looking at a sample of a HTTP request that is being sent from WebMD, which is a medical information website, to Gravity.com, which is an ad tracker. And you can see that Gravity.com is explicitly recording the referrer, which includes the search term by user. So there's an important privacy concern here. After observing a strong presence of user ID sharing in our passive data set, we further examined the intentions, the potential intentions behind user ID sharing by studying the effect of user profile on the presence of ID sharing groups. For this purpose, we created 5 different user profiles with accounts on Google, Amazon, Twitter, and eBay. We assigned 3 different profile sizes to our users. Profile size in terms of the number of browsing history. We assigned to 2 users a profile size including Alexa's top 500 websites. Alexa's top 500 websites, and to 2 users Alexa's top 200 websites, and 1 user without any previous browsing history. And also to be able to compare the effect of not having any account, we had 1 user without any account and without any browsing history. And also to create this browsing history, we crawled the corresponding Alexas list for 5 consecutive times. After training our profile, we ran our main measurement, which we crawled top 1,000 Alexas websites for 10 times. So here you are looking at the accumulated number of user ID sharing domains across 10 iterations and for each user. Our first observation was that there is a considerable jump between first iteration and the second iteration in terms of the number of ID sharing domains. Interestingly, for the user that didn't have any previous browsing history, there is a minimum difference between first iteration and second iteration, and first iteration is considerably, the number of ID sharing domains is higher than other user profiles that we had. So looking at the different profile sizes shows that users with higher amount of browsing history, with larger, don't know why it's, sorry. Users with larger profile size, they are tracked slightly with higher number of ID sharing domains than those that they have a smaller profile size. I don't know why it does this. Yeah, sorry. So just automatically goes. So when user is logged in, regardless of the amount of browsing history, there are a handful number of ID sharing domains. So this question may arise that what will happen if user is logged out? How user profile reflects on the presence of ID sharing domains. You may expect that the number of ID sharing domains may be less when user is logged out. But we observe that this is actually not the case, and when user is logged out, there is a higher number of ID sharing domains. We further examine the effect of being logged in and logged out on the ID sharing by looking at the organizational sharing groups. We applied the same set of rules that I mentioned earlier, and we identified organizational ID sharing groups. We identified about 700 organizational ID sharing groups, of which half of them just automatically goes, of which half of them had 2 distinct organizations. And similar to our passive data set, we observed Google and Rubicon project have the highest presence in the 2 organizational groups. So looking at this figure shows the number of organizational ID sharing groups against their group size, and we see that again in the logged out condition, there is the number of ID sharing groups with bigger members is higher. So we here in the logged out mode, we have about 23 cases, 23 unique ID sharing groups with members more than 30. So there are more than 30 different organizations collaborating in one ID sharing groups, implying the complicated communication between these parties. Here, for example, this is an example of the biggest ID sharing group in the logged out mode that we observed. This group consists of 47 different organizations, and there are intangible connections between these parties. Some of them, they have a stronger connection with each other. For example, the Rubicon project and Sticky Ad TV, that is a video publisher services, they have a stronger connection with each other. So putting together our putting together our observations when user is logged out and logged in suggests that when user is logged out, there are more domains collaborating with each other, probably because there is less information available about the user, and different parties are trying to collect more information to be able to get more precise profile of the user. We have also checked the difference of the categories of services when user is logged in and logged out, and we haven't found any specific difference in these two conditions. So we believe that this unexpected result is related to lack of information about user. So to recap, we identified a significant presence of ID sharing domains across different organizations, across different categories. We observed that users, the users are tracked and ID sharing is happening regardless of having account on websites or not, having browsing history or not, being logged in or logged out at all. We want to clarify that from the client point of view, we cannot determine that if there is any aggregation of this data happening or not. But considering the possibility of this practice and the benefits behind it for different businesses, it is important to get more insight into the main intentions behind ID sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Are there any questions that you would like to ask? Well, one obvious question is, can the user do something? Can I influence the type of sharing or the level of sharing that all these trackers do with my IDs?
Well, the main concern here is exactly this, that the users, they don't have any control. So we even did a small experiment by setting a private session for browser. So if a browser is using a incognito mode or private session on Firefox, still we observed, well, the number of ID sharing was less, but it is still happening. So that's the main concern, that there is no control over this practice.
So also avoiding cookies or cleaning out cookies doesn't really help.
Yeah, so in the private mode, what it does is that it doesn't let the websites to store cookies, and it doesn't store the browsing history. So it may reduce it, but it doesn't make it zero. That's the problem.
Yes?
Is it possible to have some kind of mechanism, something like a plugged-in JavaScript which detects the sharing of IDs? I mean, generally you accept or you don't accept cookies, but you never know what's going on when you accept a cookie. So is it possible to have some kind of mechanism that your ID is being propagated through the mechanism that you follow to monitor the sharing process?
Yeah, actually with the browser extension that we implemented, for our own tests, we applied the same methodology on our server side, and applying the same method, we can identify the IDs that the specific users are being shared. So we did a kind of a pilot version of that extension. So it is doable to identify these IDs at least.
More questions?